build unconscious knowledge in English? Let me repeat that.
Hi, let me tell you the most important secret. To speak English well, you need to build unconscious knowledge in English. Let me repeat that. If you want to speak English fluently, you need a high level of unconscious knowledge in English. So, what is it? Well, unconscious knowledge is the ability to do something without conscious thought. For example, riding bicycle, playing musical instrument, and speaking in your native language. Unconscious knowledge is automatic. To use a knowledge, you don't have to think about it. You don't have to focus your attention on it. That's why you can ride bicycle and talk to someone else at the same time. You don't have to focus on your leg. It's also why musicians can play musical instrument and sing at the same time. Now, think about how you speak your first language. When you talk in your native language, do you think about grammar rules? Do you think about syntax or sentence structure? No, you don't think about any of that, right? But for some reason, every sentence that comes out of your mouth is grammatically correct. Even though you are not thinking about grammar, everything you say makes sense grammatically. Why is that? Well, it's because you have high level of unconscious knowledge in your native language. So, if you want to speak English well, you need to increase your unconscious knowledge in English. If you do that, speaking English will feel natural and automatic, like you speak in your native language. How you acquire unconscious knowledge? Unfortunately, this is very difficult to do. The problem is that this type of knowledge cannot be taught. It cannot be acquired. You cannot improve it from reading book or watching video on YouTube. If you do that, you only gain knowledge which is called conscious knowledge. It is not automatic. It is the knowledge that you have to think about it. You have to focus your attention on it. This means when you speak English, you have to think about grammar, you have to decide what tense you will use or anything else. And it doesn't work when you talk to someone because you don't have time to think about grammar. When someone asks you, you have to respond immediately. Sadly, many people love studying grammar. They love watching lessons about tenses, prepositions, adjective, and so on. They believe that it can improve their English better. They don't realize that it's conscious and non-automatic knowledge, which is not very useful in spoken English. The thing is, speaking a language involves two parts of the brain, the conscious part and the unconscious automatic part. When you speak your first language, the conscious part focuses on the information that you want to communicate, while the unconscious part focuses on the grammar. This coordination allows you to speak fluently. If you want to say something, you can just say it, and the unconscious part will make sure that your speech follows the grammar. The process is automatic. It's amazing actually. But what happens when a grammar nerd, someone who studies a lot of grammar, what happens they want to speak English? Well, here's what happened. The conscious part now has to focus on the informations and the grammar at the same time. It has to focus on two things simultaneously, which is impossible to do. This is why many students speak poorly despite knowing all the grammar rules. So don't learn English through study. Instead, you have to learn English the same way you learn your first language. We call this way of learning unconscious learning. What is unconscious learning? Does it mean learning while you sleep? Actually, no. In this context, the word unconscious means unaware. So, unconscious learning means you are unaware that you are learning something. The learning takes place outside of your awareness. One example of this way of learning is listening to conversation in English. When you listen to conversations, your goal is not to learn English, but you understand the conversation, right? The unconscious part of your brain is learning English behind the scenes. This is how you learn your first language. You didn't learn through study. You learn by listening to people talking over and over. And you didn't try to memorize or understand any rules. You just focus on the informations and let your brain learn the language in the background. So remember, when you learn English unconsciously, you get unconscious automatic knowledge. When you learn English consciously by studying grammar, you get conscious non-automatic knowledge. There are two methods you can use to build unconscious knowledge. These are the method that I use to become fluent in English. The first one is listening, of course. The second one is input-driven speaking practice. Let's talk about listening. Listening is a very popular method for learning English. Everybody tells you to listen to English. But is it really necessary? I mean, what if you are not looking to improve your listening? If your goal is to improve your speaking, why you need to spend time on listening? Why not just focus on speaking practice? Okay, here's the deal. You need to improve your listening on a regular basis. In fact, it becomes impossible to be fluent if you are not listening. The reason is regular listening makes it easy to improve your speaking. You see, English language is very complex. If you don't listen to English very much, you will never become familiar with the complexity of the language. So when you try to practice speaking, you will get confused very easily. Practicing new word will be confusing, everything will be confusing. So because your brain cannot handle the complexity of the language. On the flip side, if you listen to English regularly, you become comfortable with the language. So the complexity will not confuse you, and as the result, it will be easier for you to speak up. You need to feed your brain as much input as possible by listening. What about reading? Do you need also read to speak English? If you can do listening and reading, that's better. But if you don't have a lot of time, just focus on listening because it will help you focus on pronunciations, intonations, pitch, things like that. Besides, when you watch a movie or YouTube video with English subtitles, you are essentially reading, right? So even if you focus on listening, you will sometimes get to practice your reading skill as well. So make sure to consume a lot of content like YouTube video, podcasts, audiobooks, movies, and TV shows in English. If you don't understand the content, you can read subtitle. Make sure the subtitles is in English, not in your language. What content is best for learning English? This is your question, right? The answer is simple. The best content for learning English is content you enjoy. For example, if you like traveling, you may watch YouTube video about traveling. If you are interested in business, you might listen to business podcasts. If you like action movies, then watch action movies. Watch and listen to the things that you like. It's that simple, right? Don't consume content you don't like just for the sake of learning English. If you do that, listening will make you like a chore. It will be something that you have to force yourself to do. If you do something you don't care about, you will be bored easily. And you will lose your motivation and stop doing it. I don't have this problem because I only listen to the stuff that interests me. For example, I like Japan, so I try to find YouTube channel about Japanese culture, Japanese food, and other things related to Japan. I love scary stories, so I listen to a number of scary podcasts. I also a big fan of fantasy series like Harry Potter, so I like to listen to the Harry Potter audiobooks multiple times now. So basically, I listen to things I enjoy. This way, I will have fun and learn English at the same time. By the way, there is one type of content I avoid, and that is grammar lessons. When I'm on YouTube, I never watch video about tenses, prepositions, adjective, all the boring stuff. Because I know that if I consume this type of content, I would develop the habit of thinking about grammar while speaking, which is not what I want. I want to speak English naturally, like I speak my native language. So make sure you listen to things that enjoyable and avoid content related to grammar. How much time you spend listening each day? The answer is as much as possible. Like I said earlier, English is very complex, so your brain needs a lot of input before you master the language. The more input you get, the faster your English will improve. But if you are busy and don't have time, that's okay. Let me share a tips that works well for me. If your listening is good enough, you don't need to look at the screen to read subtitles. You can practice listening while doing other activities. Personally, I like to listen while walking out, doing chores, or commuting. How much time should you spend listening each day? The answer is as much as possible. Like I said earlier, English is very complex, and so your brain needs a lot of input before you can master the language. So, the more time you spend listening, the better. If you have 30 minutes a day, listen for 30 minutes a day. If you have 10 hours a day, listen for 10 hours a day. The more input you get, the faster you improve your English. But if you are busy, let me share the tips that works well for me. If your listening is good enough, you don't need to look at the screen to read subtitle. You can practice listening while doing other activities. Personally, I like to listen while walking out, doing chores, or commuting. With this simple strategy, I have been able to listen to English for at least 30 minutes every day without much effort. So, feel free to listen while doing your daily activities. But don't do it while working or studying, alright? The activity has to be something simple, something you can do easily without much concentrations. With this approach, you really don't have to spend your free time listening to English, which means you can dedicate some of that time while speaking practice. Practice is essential to improve our English. If you want to speak English well, you have to do much practice. You have to practice, you have to open your mouth and speak some English. But why if you don't have friends to speak English? Some people solve this problem in simple way. They simply talk to themselves in English. And I used to do that. When I was starting out, I started speaking about random topic. I talk about my job, the next day I talk about my hobbies and so on. But after a while, I stopped doing it because there are two problems with this approach. The first problem is while you are talking to yourself, you are not learning any new word or phrases, right? You're just practicing words that you have known. You don't learn anything new. The second problem, when you have a grammar mistake while speaking, this practice will not correct this mistake. So after practicing this way for a while, you might be able to speak more quickly, but your English will be difficult to understand because you don't speak or sound like a native. You have your own way talking in English. So, if you talk to yourself doesn't work, how about talking with someone online? Unfortunately, the same problems still apply. If your speaking partner is English learner like you, they probably make a lot of a mistake while speaking. If you talk to them, you are exposing yourself to broken English. It is bad grammar and incomplete sentences. Don't get me wrong. I don't say that you should not chat with other English learner. It's okay to do that from time to time. But if your speaking needs a lot of improvement, then you should focus on something which is called input driven practice. What is it? Well, input driven practice is when you practice with some type of English materials. It could be YouTube videos, a podcast, a movies, or anything that contains native speech. The idea is that by practicing with input, you are exposed to new vocabulary and proper grammar, which helps you to speak and sounds more native. Input driven practice usually involves imitating or copying a native speakers. If you have ever heard language learning methods like shadowing or imitation, those all are input driven practice. I will explain how you can practice this technique. Find the audio or video of native speaker speaking. You don't have to speak yet, just listen and make sure you understand everything. Be sure to look up words and phrases you don't know. Now, if the speech is long, you don't have to listen to the whole things. Just listen to the first 3 to 5 minutes. After you finish listening, you are ready to begin your practice. This time, you are going to repeat after the speaker word for word. So, after a few words, pause the audio and repeat what you hear out loud. You don't have to wait until the end of the sentence because that might be too difficult. You can pause the sentence and repeat 4 or 5 times. When you imitate, try to copy not only the word but also the rhythm, pronunciations, and the emotions. Copy everything so you sound exactly like that person. So that was one way to practice imitations. But this technique is flexible. As your speaking improves, you can make the practice more challenging to match your proficiency level. For examples, instead of repeating a few words at a time, you can try to memorize and repeat one sentence at a time. If you come across a very long sentence and you can't remember the exact words, that's okay. The human brain is not very good at remembering individual words or small details, but it's good at remembering meaning or key informations. So, if you forget the original sentence, try to express the meaning in your own words. For example, if the original sentence was walking alone in the dense forest at night is absolutely terrifying, you might say something like, walking alone in the forest at night is very scary. Or, if it is too difficult, you can just say, walking in the forest is scary. The process of expressing something in your own word is really helpful. It improves your ability to improvise and find the right words to express yourself. There is more than one way to practice imitation, so feel free to do it however you like. The important thing is you always practice with input to ensure constant exposure to proper English. Lot of listening and lot of speaking practice.